Well, since he was appointed Crown Prince in June, Mohammed bin Salman has flagged broad plans to transform both Saudi Arabia's culture and its economy. Just over a week ago, he promised to return the kingdom to what he called a moderate Islam. Well, with me in the studio is Andreas Craig, who is a strategic security analyst and an assistant professor at King's College here in London. Thanks so much for joining us here in the studio. First of all, what do you make of this pretty dramatic and pretty sudden shakeup?
I mean, if you look at Twitter today, I mean, it was all about, this is like a big bang of what's happening in Riyadh, a lot of things happening, a lot of conspiracy theories as well. I think there are two things happening here. Yes, there is a clampdown on corruption. I think that's very important. If you want to bring Saudi Arabia into the 21st century, you need to clamp down on corruption. But obviously, how do you define corruption is a different issue. I think there are two more important underlying things. One, making the economy ready. That also means consolidating power over the economy, consolidating money, power over money as well. I mean, someone like Prince Talal, for example, he himself has billions of dollars invested overseas. Bringing that money back home, exercising more control over that entity is very important for the Saudi economy, which lacks money at the moment. And the other thing is obviously political power, as well as getting rid of these people that might potentially stand in the way of these radical reforms that we're seeing happening in Saudi Arabia, or that at least Mohammed bin Salman is trying to do in the future. And as well, Mohammed bin Salman is trying this transition is not over. I think he will be king very soon, in a matter of a month. And, you can't have people there with alternative power centers.
I mean, you talk about sort of consolidating, financially and getting the economy ready. Of course, what Mohammed bin Salman has been promising is a change of the economy and the culture as well. Arguably, the two go hand in hand. Yeah. He could try and change the economy. How hard is it going to be for him to change the culture? Is it just a matter of, demoting a few princes and ministers? No. I mean, the shakeup that we're seeing right now is basically completely changing the nature of the state of Saudi Arabia, and that goes back all the way to the 1930s, and even I would even say until the 18th century, having these two poles. On the one hand, the pole of the Al Saud is the political power, and on the other hand, the religious pole, which is the ulama, the clerics of the country. And first of all, getting rid of that clerical influence, the religious conservative influence that particularly arose after 1979, this is going to be difficult. He's doing it, and I think this is what the young Saudis want. But the problem is he has to fight against the older generation. He has to fight against those that rose and grew into the Saudi Arabia that we know today. And, doing that against some of the people who have very good relationships with this old system and have made a lot of fortune in this system. And that's going to be difficult. And that's why over the last couple of months, we've seen so many arrests, not just of liberals, but people who are actually quite outspokenly in favor of his policies, people who have a lot of money, people who have a lot of influence, all of them being arrested. This is some sort of authoritarian liberalization, if you want. Politically, very much clamping down on people, and socially, talking at least about liberalization. Andreas Craig, I know you'll be with us for the next few hours to analyze this in more detail. For the moment, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, with me in the studio is Andreas Craig, who is a strategic security analyst and an assistant professor at King's College here in London. Thanks for joining us again. So they didn't discuss it officially on the phone, as far as we know. But what do you think Donald Trump's reaction will be to this, night of the long knives that we've seen in Saudi Arabia?
Exactly. I think this is not just the phone call that we had last night. I mean, Kushner was there on a secret visit a couple of weeks ago. And all this was already discussed. I'm pretty sure that, MBS let them know that he wants to consolidate power, that he needs to do this in order to push through all these different agendas that he has. And that means, you have to do this with an iron fist. So this is a part of this, what I talked about, the authoritarian liberalization, which means you need to do this with an iron fist, and you can't really, take prisoners, although he literally took some prisoners here. But he had to get rid of these people because he thought they might potentially undermine his ability to push these things through, because that's not a democratic process. It's a process that is led from the top, from the center, from this very small nucleus around Mohammed bin Salman, and he didn't want any opposition. So that's something that the Americans like, because the Americans want Saudi Arabia to make these reforms. They need Saudi Arabia as, they are somewhat the bridgehead in the fight against Iran. They're the bridgehead in the fight against ISIS and radical jihadism. So they need these reforms. But at the same time, they obviously need Saudi Arabia to also be economically stable. And I think this is one of the problems here because, having people like Talal, who is so well invested in the West, having someone like him imprisoned with billions of dollars invested overseas, that sends a signal to investors in New York, in London, who might want to come to Saudi's help, actually, in this kind of financial crisis that they're in at the moment. And, this is something that kind of sends the wrong signal. So it's a bit of a dilemma here, because on the one hand, yes, they need a strong Mohammed bin Salman, but they also don't want to scare investors who might want to come and help Saudi Arabia.
I mean, I guess the US would also want more stability in the region, obviously. And if we look at a lot of the foreign policies that have MBS's stamp on it, for example, 2.5 years of war in Yemen, when we still see the Houthis in control of the capital, then stability isn't really what he's been bringing to the region.
Absolutely, and I think that's the key problem. So if you look at the track record of Mohammed bin Salman, so he's been the defense minister overseeing the war in Yemen that is in a stalemate right now, a terrible stalemate because the Houthis are still fighting, they're still sending missiles. He's overseeing the entire idea of liberalizing the economy, so bringing Saudi Aramco to the stock exchange next year. He wanted an IPO of $2 trillion. He will never get that. And within this current climate, he will be probably getting even less money for it. And the third problem being the Qatar crisis. This is also something that he was somewhat driving. And in this kind of climate, Mohammed bin Salman has not really made sure that he is becoming this anchor of stability that he wants to be. And on the other hand, you've got the Iranians. The Iranians are a lot less irrational. They're a lot more rational, long-term thinking, a lot more strategic in what they're doing, and they are a lot calmer than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, if I was an investor right now, I was thinking, what is going to happen next? There's so much unpredictability, so much instability, and that's not something that the markets need at the moment. They need predictability, and Mohammed bin Salman needs to achieve this.
Yeah, and also Saudi Arabia, not a country that's been used to a lot of change quite this quickly. Andreas Craig, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you. Well, with me to discuss this further is Andreas Craig, who is a strategic security analyst and assistant professor at King's College in London. Thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. A real meteoric rise to power, if we think that it was only a few months ago that Mohammed bin Salman was appointed crown prince, and now we see the sort of night of the long knives where he effectively pushes away anyone that might even vaguely be a competition. Do you think this is an effective way of going about it in a country like Saudi Arabia that is generally sort of quite resistant to change and certainly hasn't seen anything on this scale in recent history? Yeah,
I think there's a huge difference here between the ambitions that have been publicly announced of what they want to become, and then looking at the reality of, there have always been ambitions by Saudi princes and Saudi royalty to actually make huge changes. Not as big as this, not in such a short time frame, but then again, the country is under immense pressure. A lot of things have to be pushed through within a very short time. And let's not forget, I always compare this to the revolution, the French Revolution. It was always about, they wanted to liberalize, and they had to do it with, a lot of terror. And they did it with a lot of force, and they did it with a lot of iron fist. And sometimes in order to achieve something, even a liberal ambition, you need to use a lot of force, and that's what's happening right now. The question mark that I have is, though, is he doing this for his own benefit, Mohammed bin Salman, or is he doing it for the benefit of the country? And that's the question mark. And that leads me back to the whole issue of corruption, because is it in a country like Saudi Arabia, which is a rentier state, where it's always about money being distributed, money being used in order to excel, right? In a country where few people really enjoy the benefits of the rent of that country, can you, in a country like this, can you really eliminate corruption? No. And then at the same time, the king himself spent $100 million to go to Morocco. Mohammed bin Salman himself spent $600 million on a yacht last year. Where do you draw the line when it comes to corruption here? So there are a lot of ambitions, but the ambitions to actually, do they really want to achieve something for the better of the country, or are they trying to achieve something for the better of themselves, which is about consolidating his own power? Obviously,
you mentioned corruption because that's been the reason given for all these arrests. They've all been accused of corruption, but I guess the one thing that's been a constant is the total lack of transparency. They may or may not be guilty of corruption. We sort of haven't seen anything that leads us one way or another. So even though MBS is trying to implement all these changes, it seems that, transparency certainly isn't one of them.
Absolutely. It's still very opaque. In a country, it's a very centralist, centralized autocratic regime. The king in the end and the crown prince make the decisions. There is no real judiciary here that can check. They say there has been an independent committee being set up that makes all these investigations and the claims and allegations of those people being arrested. But who is at the center of the committee? It's again Mohammed bin Salman. He's at the center of all these decisions. So how transparent can it possibly be? I think it's all about the consolidation of economic and political power in the kingdom.
Well, we've seen a lot of changes in the past few months and weeks. I'm sure we'll see many more still to come, and I hope to be talking to you about those when they happen. For the moment, Andreas Craig, thank you.
Thank you.